Playoff betting preview. I'm Joe Spano at Joe Spano56 on Twitter, along with Chris Dell, the mad journalist. That's MADD journalist on Twitter. And we're going to dive right in here in just a couple of seconds and preview Game 5, Eastern Conference Finals between the Boston Celtics and the Miami Heat. Big man, Game 4 out east was, I don't believe was what either of us expected. On some level, there were some things I expected there, but there were some things I just didn't expect at all last night. And more than anything else, I laid off the game altogether as far as sides and totals, because with the uncertainty of who was going to play, who wasn't going to play, and their physical conditioning as far as what kind of shape they were going to be in, whether they were trying to gut it out or they were actually going to be at 100%, I had a hard time formulating a take on the game, and as a result, I passed on Game 4. And, we'll take a quick look back at Game 4 because some of the things we did see may take us towards where we're going in Game 5.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny when you think about it because the NBA playoffs is just all about overreactions, and we just continue to see that going back and forth from Game 1 to Game 2 to Game 3. We mentioned the zigzag theory where like one team zigs, the next team zags in the next game. And this is what we saw in the Milwaukee-Boston series from the beginning of Game 1 until we got to Game 7 when Boston had to win. And this is what we've been seeing now in this series as well. And to an extent, we also saw it in Miami and Philly in the Eastern Conference semifinals where it was 2-0, then it was 2-2, and then finally Miami turned on the switch and won the last two there. So it's when you think about it like that, it's almost like in hindsight's 2020, obviously, but it's like, how did we not get there? Like, how did we not just think, hey, like whatever team loses, pick them to win in the next game because the urgency and the motivation is going to flip in their factor there. So I was not surprised to see it. I mean, just in terms of like the blowouts we've had, I saw a stat that in the last 17 to 18 playoff games in these playoffs that I believe the average margin of victory has been over 15 points per game, closer to 20 points per game. I think we've had an average of like 7 clutch time minutes per game, which is like down the stretch when games are even close within 10 points. So, we're just continuing to see blowout after blowout. Obviously, the Golden State series is a little bit different. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But in this series, like honestly, I think you can agree with me, Joe. It's like we felt that if Miami won this game, the series was over because they're going to go back to Game 5 and okay, whether they close out in Game 5 or not, well, they're going to be up 3-1, and they've been so dominant they're not going to lose 3 straight games. So this was essentially a must-win game for Boston, just like it was a must-win game for Boston. We thought in round 2 when Boston went down 1-0 to the Milwaukee Bucks, and we saw Boston have to win Game 2 back at home in Boston to even that series out. So not surprising to me. I haven't been betting this series much in terms of side and total just because of so many unknowns and just the variance from game to game. But it was interesting to see that for me, the biggest prop takeaway, the biggest impact takeaway in terms of betting, also in terms of just, who's going to win this series outright in the end is I don't know if there's a coincidence now. Like 4 games is not a big sample, especially when it comes to the NBA playoffs, but we have to look at the data that we have. And what I've seen is that Bam Adebayo has been present as a factor in one game, and that was the one game that Robert Williams did not play for Boston. And Robert Williams was going to be the defensive player of the year before he got hurt at the tail end of the regular season, which essentially prompted the voters to switch it to Marcus Smart because he played more regular season games. Now, obviously, Bam Adebayo was in the mix for that as well. He didn't play enough games either, but Robert Williams' impact on this series, he doesn't score many points outside of Game 1. He's limited with his knee. That's a whole other issue in itself for the future in terms of does he need to get surgery again, et cetera. But to me, I see a clear difference in what Bam Adebayo has done in the 3 games without Robert Williams and in the 1 game that Robert Williams does not play. Obviously, we still didn't have Smart last night. That didn't seem to matter much. That Bam Adebayo basically went to a passive secondary, third, fourth scoring option on this Miami Heat team. So maybe it has more to do with the zigzag theory in terms of one team shows up one night, the next team has the motivation to show up the next night. But that's the biggest prop takeaway that I took is that, hey, I thought Boston was the better team offensively and maybe even close to being as good defensively as Miami going into this series. And it's like we all forget that happened after game 3 when Boston got blown out. Now we're all kind of reminded of it again. So I think this is a complete toss-up series at this point. I would not be surprised to see Boston go in and take game 5. I also wouldn't be surprised to see Miami come in and win by 30 points and continuing to see these blowouts go back and forth. So that's kind of my main takeaways, like the underrated value of having Robert Williams, even playing 20, 25 minutes on the floor per game for these Boston Celtics here.
Oh, it's huge for their defense. And I've talked about it several times in our shows together. With Robert Williams, the Celtics are the best defensive team in the NBA. Without him, because of the other defensive pieces they have and the versatility of those pieces, when Peyton Pritchard's not on the floor, they're one of the top 5 defensive teams in the NBA. And even when Peyton Pritchard is on the floor with the right other 4 guys, they're still a top 5 NBA team. When Robert Williams is on the floor, along with everybody else, because you mentioned it just a couple of minutes ago, you probably have 2 of the 5 best defensive players in all of the NBA, or 2 of the 3 best defensive players in all of the NBA, and Marcus Smart and Robert Williams. And they're frequently on the floor at the same time, probably about 20-odd minutes a night. So when you look at the Celtics, yeah, they're when healthy, they're the best defensive team in the NBA, and they're a top 10 offensive team. This is an elite basketball team. Again, I know we've seen a lot of blowouts in this series and throughout the NBA playoffs, but just the level of blowout here and the complete level of ineffectiveness from the Heat offense shocked me. That's what shocked me. Because when you consider, I'm not saying I expected the Heat to play great. I'm not saying I expected the Heat to win the game, because those are 2 things I didn't expect. I just really wasn't sure, with both sides dealing with injuries. I guess what I didn't expect was this kind of blowout. The one thing I did expect, and I just laid off everything altogether Monday night, because the uncertain status of so many guys and the inability to get that information, and we can usually get that information and glean it better than others, better than the public. I couldn't glean the information I needed on who was playing, who wasn't playing, what kind of shape they were going to be in if they were playing, who was gutting it out, how bad it was going to be. I said, you know what? I'm passing on this whole damn thing. I'm out. But if you read my Twitter before the game, I had a lean. The only thing I could kind of get behind yesterday was the under. I wasn't convinced on the Celtics to win the game just because I didn't know who was going to play, what kind of shape they were going to be in. I didn't know what anything was going to look like. But the one thing I kind of had a feeling on was the under. I said, all these guys are banged up. Yeah, their defense could suffer, but I have a feeling their offense could suffer more. And, in the case of the Heat, their offense did suffer more. In the case of the Celtics, their offense wasn't great either. What really brought this game crashing to the under was the pace. Unlike the other games in this series that have played in the mid-90s, basically pretty close to the Heat and Celtics regular season pace, this one played down in the high 80s. The pace really slowed down in this game, and I think that was a key factor taking this to the under. That, of course, with the just abysmal offensive effort of the Heat, but I think the pace had as much to do with that as anything else. That's where I was most surprised, because it looked like it was pretty clear from the first 3 games of this series that this series was going to go a little faster than we thought. And it slowed down in game 4 in a major, major way. And I don't know that continues. I think game 5 in Miami, we may see a little bit of a regression back to the norm in this series, where I'm not telling you these teams play fast, but by playoff standards, they're playing faster than we expected. They're playing pretty close to their regular season pace. And I think as a result, if there's one thing I can really get behind in game 5 of this series, very much like I felt about game 4, I mean, obviously opposite of how I felt about game 4, I like the over here. They've ticked that total down a little bit. I think the pace picks up. the Heat are not going to play as bad offensively in Game 5 as they did in Game 4. I think we all agree with that statement.
I think you have to agree that the Heat, they have to pick the pace up or else they're just not going to be able to score enough to
Right.
win.
They need to get into transition. That's another factor here with the questionable status of Hero, and some of the other things they're dealing with, and at times their inability to score in half court and hit 3-pointers in particular. You know, you look at the regular season, they were one of the better 3-point shooting teams and one of the better 3-point defending teams in the NBA. You look at them in the playoffs, it's a different animal. They are really struggling with their consistency from beyond the arc. So I think you're dead on right. They're going to want to get this out into transition. They're going to want to force some turnovers. They're going to want to quicken the pace at home. And I think that's going to be, as you mentioned, that's probably their key and their chance to victory. So I expect Game 5 to be a lot faster than Game 4 and a lot more in line with the pace of the first 3 games of this series. And as a result, that probably, in my mind, makes the best play in Game 5 the over, because that's a really low total. I mean, you're now back in the 203.5 area because of, correction off of the sub 200-point effort total in game 4, way below 200. So they've brought it down to about 203.5. I like the over in this spot. And I know as we move forward in this series, we may start to see these games slow down again after Game 5. If this does somehow make it to a Game 7, that's one of these games that I could see going at a snail's pace, as Game 7s are wont to do. But I think for Game 5, as you mentioned, the Heat are going to have to pick up the pace. They're going to have to get into transition. It's their best method to keep up with the Celtics on the scoreboard. So while I don't think it's a track meet of Warriors-Grizzlies or Grizzlies-T-Wolves, I think it's going to get back into the mid-90s like the first 3 games of the series, and I think that allows this one to cruise over the total. If you ask me about a side, I'm going to abandon zigzag here, and I guess a lot of this has to do with how I felt about these two teams coming into the series. I thought it would be a close, hard-fought, pretty long series, but I really do believe, and you look at the numbers and you look at history, in these, they call it the always pivotal Game 5 when teams are tied 2 apiece because, what is it, about 80% of the time, the team that wins Game 5 wins the series in a 7-game series when they're tied 2 apiece going into Game 5. Well, that being the case, I believe the Celtics would win this series. I believe they find a way to win Game 5. They're only laying 1.5. They look like they're probably actually going to be the healthier team. Who knows? We can find out that Robert Williams doesn't play, and that only help our overplay. But it looks like Marcus Smart should be back for Game 5.
Yeah.
I know the Heat are trying to get Tyler Hero back for Game 5, but I don't know how sure I am on that.
Yeah. I think the bigger issue could be Jimmy Butler.
Yeah, I don't know. You watched him play. He gutted it out, but he was absolutely abysmal. What do they get from him?
That was one of the props that I had going in that I probably in hindsight should have played more on was Jimmy Butler under his PRA, points plus rebounds plus assists.
Or PAR, depending on who you ask. I've been watching this debate. I'm like, all of a sudden we're changing the name on it because it's proper spelling. It's been PRA since I've been in this business.
I don't have any respect for anyone who calls it par. So
but it never was. Was it ever called par before 2 weeks ago when somebody got a hair up their butt because they were watching golf? It's been PRA since I remember.
It's PRA, but there's some people on a very popular mainstream sports betting TV show that call it par. And I don't know when they started calling it
rebounds, assists. They always go in that order in the box score. And it had nothing to do with it being an acronym based on spelling. It was PRA because of where these stats fell
PRA
in NBA.
it sounds better too. PRA sounds better than par. Like
Well,
we're not playing golf. You know what? This is a deep dive podcast for after the finals ends, Joe. So
yeah.
we gotta sell this
But I mean,
conversation.
I saw that. I'm like, well, what are these guys doing? It's been PRA, and they act like they don't acknowledge the fact that it's that way because of where it falls in the box score. Every NBA box score is the same: points, rebounds, assists. I have never seen an NBA box score printed anywhere, or now when you look on a computer, where it was points, assists, rebounds. They're all done the same way. So that way, even if you don't look at the top heading, you know what the numbers are, and you know what column you're looking at.
You're speaking the truth, Joe. Amen.
Well, they don't, you know, they say never let the facts get in the way of a good story. So whoever thinks it's par, it's not par. It's PRA. It's been PRA since the prop business has started. It's always going to be PRA. If you insist on calling it par, listen to a different show.
Yeah. Come at me on Twitter, bro, if you call it par. Let's just leave it at that. But yeah, you know, it's just to put a bow on this series here, because we can only talk so much about each of the two series going on now, is the whole thing I talked about with Jimmy Butler. I don't think it's a bad play to go to his under PRA again in game 5, just because of the health issue. Like, I think I've been trying to play some of the health angles coming into like some of these series throughout the playoffs. You know, sometimes it just smacks you in the face, doesn't work out. The guy guts it out, has a great game. But I think more often than not, especially as you get deeper into the playoffs, playing those injury angles when like a guy legitimately could be significantly less than 100%, and the books are still lining those combo props at points, rebounds, and assists very high. So I think that it's not bad to do that, because let's be frank here, that Jimmy Butler scoring 40 points doesn't mean the Heat are going to win.
No.
You know, Bam Adebayo needs to show up. Lowry needs to show up. Hero hopefully needs to show up for them. The other guys need to hit open threes as well. So there's going to be other.
But I think you know one thing: scoring less than 20 means they're going to lose.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Scoring 40 doesn't mean they win, because they're struggling to get anybody else but Butler to score on a consistent basis, especially with Tyler Hero potentially out of the lineup. Yeah. But him scoring less than 20 means they probably lose by 20 or better.
And the thing I didn't like about it is that you saw them come out with a intended game plan in game 3 of like, hey, you know what we did in the past that worked was run the offense through Bam Adebayo, at least half the offense. And it really worked. And my favorite prop going into game 4 was Adebayo over 2.5 assists. It was close to even money. And, you know, just Jimmy Butler coming back into the offense, like he was the predominant ball handler for most of that game. And what I did not like to see, and this is something I got to knock, as much as I give props to Jimmy Butler, he's probably my favorite player in the league personally as a fan, but Jimmy Butler should not have come into that game. He should not have ended that game as the guy who took the most shot attempts. Obviously, Oladipo off the bench had 16 shot attempts, but they should have ran the offense through Adebayo. It didn't look like they even tried to do so. They fell in a hole so early that they almost abandoned just completely what worked in game 3. And again, like Robert Williams on the court, yeah, it affects that. Bam Adebayo went from having, I think, between 10 to 12 potential assists in game 3 to only 6 potential assists in game 4. So I almost dropped off by half. Still had 2 assists and didn't play the entire fourth quarter. So I still felt like that process was right, that we would have hit that prop.
You can't forecast a blowout in that spot. You didn't even know who the hell was playing and what they were going to look like. So
that's one thing I didn't like to see.
Play were spot on right.
But for someone as like, if you're a Heat backer, I would not have liked to see what happened last night, and the fact that they completely went away from that because Jimmy Butler came back. And I felt like the emphasis was too much on like, hey, let Jimmy run the offense, where Jimmy's not even 100%. And Jimmy running the offense hasn't necessarily been the best thing going for you. It's been Kyle Lowry pushing the pace. It's been Jimmy playing off the ball. It's been Bam Adebayo running the high point offense. So all these different things are working. And just because Butler's back in the fold, you go back to that. I didn't like to see that as a Heat fan. Like, I'm not a backer. Like, I originally put a little bit on the Heat to win the series when it first started because of game 1, when Smart was hurt and Horford got COVID. I thought that, hey, maybe this COVID thing could be bigger than it is. I'm going to throw a little bit on the Heat around minus 120, minus 130. Then I went and I put the same thing on the Celtics after game 2 because how they look so dominant. So I've been back and forth. I've been hedging a little bit at this point. I think maybe I come out a little bit on top if the Celtics wind up winning this thing, or even winning in 6 for that matter, because I did bet a little bit on them at minus 1.5. I think about it like this now at this point, Joe. If the Heat win this series, they need Jimmy Butler to be the Eastern Conference Finals MVP, and there's better value on that if you bet him at like plus 180 as opposed to the Heat on the series spread at plus 140. I think there's a little bit of value there. I think it's even more so though with the Celtics that anytime Tatum doesn't play well, the Celtics lose. And when he does play well, they win. And he usually plays well in terms of these really big ceiling performances and hitting these really big clutch time shots. So Jason Tatum, you can get at close to even money, like minus 110 on DraftKings to win Eastern Conference Finals MVP. So I think that that's a much better bet than paying the juice at like minus 175 at this point for the Celtics to win the series. And look, the Heat can come out and win Game 5. You're going to get a better price on Celtics to win the series. They're going to be down 3-2 in the same situation they were against Milwaukee in round 2. But that to me is like, I did that after Game 2. I bet Tatum at a plus money price to win Eastern Conference Finals MVP. I still think that's a better value now than just betting the Celtics minus 175 or whatever it is on this series. But that's kind of my overall thoughts on how to approach that down the road. I also think you can get decent value on betting Boston Celtics and Golden State Warriors exact series price or exact series matchup. I think you can get that around that same price there. So that kind of even surpasses the fact that, hey, something fluky could happen in terms of the voting. We don't know how these voters are going to vote for this award yet.
Sure.
We haven't seen it yet. So I think in that sense, like those are the 3 different bets I made after Game 2 was Celtics minus 1.5 on the series spread. I'm not so confident in that anymore, although I still think it's live. Tatum Eastern Conference Finals MVP, but I think you can cover more bases in terms of a futures bet in this series. We all know no teams come back from down 3-0 in the Golden State Dallas series. So if you can still find that out there, I bet it, again, after Game 2, but Boston Celtics versus Golden State Warriors straight up in the finals. If you can get a decent price on that, that's all obviously a solid bet to save you some juice in terms of what the market is right now on that. So that's my overall thoughts on that. Joe, just my final prop thoughts on this is like, I'm going to be very, very cautious about betting any props in Game 5 because we don't have like the last game. We had the first game with no Smart and no Horford. Then we had another game with no Robert Williams. And then last night we have a game with no Smart. So it's like we've never had the same constant going from one game to another of like no Hero, no Butler, no Lowry. Like I want like what I call a clean sheet of like lineups and roster construction where I could look at the advanced data from the previous game or for the series and say, hey, look, like these numbers can tell us something here. And we're not getting that. So
you're almost back where you were before Game 1.
Yeah.
But you lay off altogether and you almost feel like you're there. So you're being very judicious with your prop plays because you only had, was it 4? It was 4 for Game 4, correct?
I had 3.
3. All right.
I played a personal one right before tip based off the data in Game 1 when Smart didn't play. And it was Derek White. He had 0 rebounding chances in Game 1 as a starting point guard. And in this game, leads the Celtics almost in rebounds himself. So it's like a complete unknown. It's like, okay, well, there was no Smart, but there was also no Horford in that game. I thought because Horford and Rob Williams were playing that, hey, even less rebounding opportunities. But you can't always make those assumptions because just one different guy in a lineup can alter so many things schematically in terms of how these games play out. So,
sure.
I lost that prop essentially by halftime last night was Derek White, and the under was juiced very highly. Like it was like very much a favorite in terms of like the under cashing when you looked at the market price for that prop there. So that's just an example of like being very careful when these rosters change. With the Dallas and Golden State series, like the only thing we have changing is that Otto Porter won't play in this game tonight here. We're talking on recording here Tuesday before Game 4, but we got the whole Game 3 of him not playing because he only played less than 10 minutes in that game as it was. So you can still be confident in those numbers overall. So that's my overall thoughts in terms of wrapping this up. And we can close this. We'll post this as a podcast here, and we'll go ahead and start up a new stream talking about the Western Conference Finals.
Absolutely. I mean, fair to say as we tie a bow around it that the Western Conference Finals I think from all perspectives, not only a props perspective, but also a sides and total perspective, is the far easier series to forecast. I know for me it is. The East right now is between the injuries, the availability, the lack of clean slate, and everything else has become a real handful. And from a sides and total perspective, value's hard to come by. And clearly, you've made it clear that the prop market value and finding something you could sink your teeth into is very, very hard to come by.
Yeah, I would say if like let's close this out with like what's our best bet for Game 5 in terms of this episode here. I would say for me, it's like I'm not going to go anywhere with the Celtics because I don't know about Marcus Smart, and that totally changes the dynamic there. Like Derek White had 16 potential assists, and we hit Marcus Smart over on his assist prop in the last game that he played because the game before that, that number was very high. Looking at the advanced data. And someone would say, "Oh, look, the Boston point guard, whoever starts there and plays that role, is having a very high assist opportunity number in terms of his potential assists per game." But again, we don't know how that role is going to be split. What percentage health is Marcus Smart going to be? So I'm going to be like probably not playing anything regarding those assist numbers when it comes to Game 5 here. Maybe I'll look at the rebounds. Like Al Horford had 21 rebounding opportunities in Game 4. And he wound up with 13 rebounds. Jaylen Brown had 17 rebounding opportunities. So, but again, Marcus Smart coming back into the fold, bigger guard, can rebound more. And we also saw Derek White rack up a lot of rebounds himself there. So those are some numbers maybe to glean from. For me, I think just playing the health angle of Jimmy Butler and the fact that the Heat, they get this done, in a grinded out defensive type of performance. I don't know if he's going to be able to stuff the stat sheet if he's truly not 100% healthy, because the fact that, like, look, they were in a very important Game 3 and they did not have that game locked up at halftime, yet he still sat the entire second half. So him coming back in Game 4, I don't know. Like, he obviously didn't look himself. And I don't know if the number is going to change that much. Maybe it goes from like 36.5 to 35.5. I'd be surprised to see it lower than 35.5 because some books were hanging even 37.5. That's the number that I bet in the last game. So if anything, I would say best bet, not official, just because we don't know the Smart situation, would be looking to play the injury angle and take the Jimmy Butler combo PRA prop under, because those PRA combo props, they're even inflated more than the individual points props, et cetera. So that's what I would say. That's my final thought. I'm probably not going to bet anything on this game prop wise until tomorrow afternoon when we get better clarity on these injuries.
Coming into it this early at this point, my best play again is over 203.5. I think it's a modest total, and there's two things that kind of take me there. Number one, we've watched game in, game out how things change. The Heat are not going to string together two offensive efforts that bad in a row. So you're going to get some regression towards their norm for Game 5. That's going to make more points. That and the fact that, as we talked about at the very beginning of all of this, the Heat's path to success is pace. Pick up the pace a little bit, get this into transition. Well, if this plays at a pace like the first 3 games of the series, if these two teams do anything reasonably decent on offense, it's going over the total. So I'm going to take the over. Who knows? You may even get a situation where Robert Williams' knee acts up again. We've gotten those last-minute ones a couple of times throughout this playoffs. If that's the case, you could see Bam going off a little bit, points go up even further. So I like the Celtics aside. I don't like them much. And I certainly would wait until we get closer to find out who's actually going to play, who's not, what they look like. I will take the over. It's meager. The pace is going to pick up, and the Heat can't be this bad on offense 2 games in a row. I like the over here.
All right, sounds good. Let's wrap this up, and then we'll talk about the Western Conference Finals on the next stream. All right.